If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. The early morning arrived cold over Miami Beach. The sound of the sea crashing against the rocks was the only noise that should have existed in that mansion of glass and marble, erected like a monument on the edge of the beach. But for months, another sound had torn through the silence of the nights in that house. A sharp, desperate cry that always started at the same time, 3 in the morning, punctually, as if an invisible clock awakened something deep inside that 7-year-old child. Robert Miller ran up the stairs for the 1,000th time that year. His heavy footsteps echoed on the imported marble floor. His heart raced, his hands trembled. He already knew what he would find when he opened the door to the pink room. The same scene that had repeated every night since his world collapsed. Isabella would be sitting up in bed, her wide eyes fixed on some point he couldn't see, her small body trembling, sweat dripping down her forehead, her hands clutching the sheet as if she were being pulled away. And that cry that was not a child's tantrum. It was a lament. It was pain. It was a search. Upon entering, he found exactly that. The girl was crying compulsively, her body shaking in spasms. Robert approached slowly, trying not to frighten her further. He knelt beside the bed and held out his hands, but Isabella recoiled as she always did. She didn't recognize him in these moments, or perhaps she did, but it wasn't him she was looking for. The screams continued, sharp, heart-wrenching. Robert felt his own tears stream down his face. Another night, another lost battle. He tried to hug her, but the girl struggled with a surprising strength for someone so small. She screamed even louder. Robert backed away, helpless. He sat on the floor and just watched his daughter writhe in an anguish that no doctor could explain. 15 minutes later, as always happened, Isabella stopped suddenly. The crying ceased. Her body relaxed. She lay down again and closed her eyes, exhausted. Robert stayed there, sitting on the cold floor, watching his daughter's breathing calm down. When he was sure she had fallen asleep, he got up with difficulty. His back ached, his head throbbed. He could barely remember the last time he had slept a full night. He went down the stairs like a ghost. He passed through the immense living room, devoid of life, despite all the expensive furniture. He reached his office and threw himself into the leather armchair. He turned on the lamp and picked up his phone. 17 missed calls, 8 messages from the office, 3 meetings he had missed that week. The empire he had built over 20 years was slowly crumbling, while he tried to save his daughter from an invisible torment. Miller. Construction. The name that had built half the luxury buildings in Miami Beach, the surname that weighed on his shoulders like an anchor. Robert looked at the empty bookshelf. There used to be photos there, smiles, memories. Now only marks remained on the wood where the picture frames had stood. He had removed everything himself, every photograph, every memory. He thought it would be easier that way, that erasing the past would help them move on, that it would protect Isabella from the pain. But he was wrong, deeply wrong. And with each passing night, that certainty became clearer. The phone vibrated again. This time he answered. It was Michael, his partner, his voice laden with a concern disguised as irritation. The residential project in South Point was behind schedule. The investors were threatening to pull their capital. Robert needed to attend the meeting the next morning without fail. Robert promised he would be there. He hung up, knowing he would probably miss it again. How could he leave the house knowing Isabella would wake up screaming, and there would be no one to try to calm her? The last nanny had quit the previous week. She lasted only 5 days. Before her, 14 others, all with the same story. They couldn't handle the pressure. Some confessed to being afraid of the house, afraid of the screams, afraid of what they couldn't understand. The most experienced ones refused the job before even meeting Isabella. The house's reputation had already spread among the agencies. No one wanted to work there. Robert was alone, completely alone. He thought about calling his mother, Mrs. Eleanor, who lived in Fort Lauderdale. But he knew she would say the same things as always, that he needed to leave the past behind, that this wasn't healthy, that Isabella needed routine, not guilt. The truth was, no one understood. No one saw what he saw every night. That inexplicable suffering, that desperate search for something that had been torn from her. The dawn arrived slowly. Robert hadn't slept. He went up to Isabella's room again and found the girl still asleep, her face as peaceful as if nothing had happened. He wondered if she remembered the nightly episodes. The doctors said probably not, that it was some kind of unconscious manifestation, but Robert doubted it. There was something in his daughter's eyes during the day, a deep sadness, an absence, as if a part of her was always looking for someone. He took a shower and put on his suit. He decided he would go to the meeting. He needed to save at least one part of the life he had left. He asked his neighbor, Mrs. Cecilia, to keep an eye on Isabella for a few hours. The woman accepted reluctantly. Everyone in the neighborhood already knew about the nightly screams. Some had complained to the condo association. Robert knew he was losing control of everything. The meeting was a disaster. Robert could barely concentrate. Michael presented numbers he didn't follow. The investors asked questions he couldn't answer. In the end, he just agreed with what was decided and left before they noticed how absent he was. On the way back home, he stopped at a coffee shop on Ocean Drive. He ordered a strong coffee and sat near the window, watching the beach life. Happy families, children playing, couples holding hands, everything he had lost. That's when the phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him accept the call. On the other end, a female voice, polite but direct. It was Sonia, from a small caregiver agency he had contacted weeks ago. She said she might have found someone. She wasn't an experienced nanny. She had no specific training for special needs children, but she was dedicated, responsible, and she really needed the job. Robert hesitated. Another one who wouldn't last a week. But desperation spoke louder. He asked her to send someone for an interview that very afternoon. Upon returning home, he found Isabella sitting on the living room sofa, watching cartoons without paying attention to the television. Mrs. Cecilia was in the kitchen preparing lunch. Everything seemed normal, but Robert knew that at night it would be different. Night was always different. He thanked his neighbor and was left alone with his daughter. Isabella looked at him with those enormous brown eyes, so much like her mother's. Robert felt his chest tighten. He approached and sat next to her. The girl didn't react, just continued staring at the television with that distant look. At 4 p.m, the doorbell rang. Robert went to answer. On the other side of the electronic gate, a thin woman with a simple appearance carried an old handbag. Her hair was tied, in a ponytail. Her clothes were clean but worn. Her eyes were tired but determined. It was Marina Hayes, 32 years old, single mother, a resident of a modest neighborhood in Homestead. Until then, she had worked 3 different jobs to support her 6-year-old son, a cleaner in the morning, a fast food attendant in the afternoon, ironing clothes at night. The job offer as a nanny meant stability. It meant being able to sleep. It meant having time for Lucas, her boy. Robert received her with suspicion. He led her to the living room and began to explain the situation. He talked about Isabella, about Down syndrome, about the nightly screams, about the nannies who had quit. Marina listened to everything in silence, without interrupting. When Robert finished, she asked only one question. "May I meet the girl?" He nodded and called for Isabella. The child entered the room slowly, curious. Marina crouched down to be at her level and smiled. She didn't try to touch her. She didn't ask invasive questions. She just said hi in a soft voice. Isabella looked at her for a long moment. Something different happened. The girl didn't back away. She didn't look away. She stood there observing this unknown woman with genuine curiosity. Robert noticed. For the first time in months, Isabella showed interest in someone. Marina stood up and looked back at him. "I'll take the job. When can I start?" Robert was surprised by the speed of her decision. She hadn't even asked about the salary, about days off, about the conditions. She just accepted. He said she could start that very night. Marina agreed. She only asked for a few hours to pick up her son from school and explained to the neighbor who cared for him that she now had a permanent job. As Marina left, Robert watched Isabella. The girl was still in the living room, but now she was looking at the door through which the woman had gone. There was something different in her gaze. It wasn't the usual absence. It was expectation, as if something inside her had awakened. Marina returned in the early evening. She brought a small suitcase with clothes and personal belongings. Robert showed her to her room, a simple but comfortable space on the ground floor. He explained the routine. Isabella had dinner at 7, took a bath at 8, went to bed at 9. And at 3 in the morning, the screams would begin. Marina absorbed every piece of information attentively. She asked practical questions about food, medications, the girl's preferences. Robert answered everything, but he noticed that Marina was genuinely interested. It wasn't just a job for her. There was something more. At night, during dinner, Marina sat at the table with Robert and Isabella. The girl ate slowly, observing the new caregiver with that fixed gaze. Marina wasn't bothered. She talked naturally, told them about Lucas, about how he loved to play at the park. Isabella didn't respond, but she seemed to be listening. Robert watched everything with a mixture of hope and skepticism. How many times had he seen this beginning? How many times had he believed that someone could help? After dinner, Marina accompanied Isabella to the bathroom for her bath. Robert stayed in the living room, tense, waiting for screams or resistance, but there was nothing, just the sound of running water. 15 minutes later, Marina came down with Isabella, already in her pajamas. The girl was calm. Robert was impressed. Bath time was usually a difficult moment, another daily battle. But that night, everything had been different. At 9 o'clock sharp, Marina took Isabella to her room. Robert followed, curious. He watched from the doorway as Marina made the bed, fluffed the pillow, and carefully tucked the girl in. She didn't rush anything. She didn't force the child to lie down. She just created a peaceful environment. Isabella lay down on her own. Marina sat on the edge of the bed and began to sing softly, a simple, old song that Robert recognized from his own childhood. Isabella closed her eyes. In a few minutes she was asleep. Robert went down the stairs in disbelief. Was it possible? Could this be the night when everything finally changed? He sat on the living room sofa and waited. Marina came down too and sat in a distant armchair. "You don't have to stay awake," Robert said. "You can rest," she smiled. "I'll wait a little, just to be sure everything is okay." The hours passed. 10 o'clock, 11, midnight, 1 in the morning, 2. Robert fought against sleep. Marina remained awake, calm, as if she were watching over something precious. And then, punctually at 3 in the morning, the scream echoed through the house. Isabella. Robert jumped to his feet, his heart pounding. But before he could go up, Marina was already standing. "Let me go first," she requested firmly. Robert hesitated, but something in her voice made him trust her. He nodded. Marina went up the stairs calmly. Robert stayed below, listening. The screams continued, sharp, desperate. He expected to hear attempts at consolation, voices trying to soothe, maybe even music. But there was none of that. Just silence. Isabella's screams continued for a few more minutes, but they began to diminish. Robert went up slowly, unable to resist his curiosity. When he reached the bedroom door, he saw something he had never seen before. Marina was sitting on the floor, her back to the bed, just looking out the window. She wasn't touching Isabella. She wasn't talking to her. She just remained there, in silence. Isabella, still in bed, had stopped screaming. She was sitting up, panting, her eyes fixed on Marina, or rather fixed on something behind Marina. The girl slowly raised her arm and pointed insistently at the window. The gesture was small, but loaded with meaning. Marina turned to the window and then looked back at Isabella. The girl pointed again, more firmly this time. Marina stood up calmly and walked to the window. The curtains were closed, as always. Robert never opened them. He couldn't bear to see the night sky. Marina looked at Isabella, as if asking for permission. The girl nodded slightly. Then Marina pulled the curtains aside. The moonlight flooded the room, silvery and soft. It was a crescent moon, bright against the clear sky. Isabella immediately got out of bed. She ran to the window and pressed her little hands against the glass. She looked up, her eyes wide, but this time not with fear. With recognition, with searching, with longing. Robert stood paralyzed at the door. What was happening? Why was Isabella reacting this way to the moon? Marina remained beside the girl, in silence, just watching. Isabella began to murmur something unintelligible, her voice low, almost a whisper. They weren't clear words, but there was intent. There was communication. Robert felt his legs weaken. There was something there that he couldn't understand, something Marina had noticed and he hadn't. After long minutes, Isabella moved away from the window. She went back to bed on her own and lay down. Marina carefully covered her again. The girl closed her eyes and fell asleep almost instantly. No screams, no desperation, just peace. Marina left the room and found Robert still standing in the hallway, his face pale. He wanted to ask questions. He wanted to understand. But the words wouldn't come. Marina just said in a soft voice, "She'll sleep now. We can talk tomorrow." Robert went down the stairs like an automaton. He sat on the sofa again and stayed there, lost in thought. What had happened? How did Marina know what to do, and why had the moon calmed Isabella? The answers didn't come. Only one certainty was slowly forming within him. This woman was different. She had seen something that everyone else, including him, had failed to see. And maybe, just maybe, she could save his daughter from the torment that consumed her nights. The early morning continued in silence. For the first time in months, there were no more screams. Isabella slept peacefully until dawn. When Robert went up to check, he found his daughter still asleep, her face serene, breathing calmly. He sat on the edge of the bed and observed a peace that had seemed impossible. Tears streamed down his face, of relief, of hope, of fear that this was just a fleeting illusion. Marina entered the room silently, carrying a tray with breakfast for Isabella. Robert looked at her, his eyes still moist. "How did you know?" The question came out almost as a whisper. Marina placed the tray on the small table and sat in the armchair next to the bed. "I didn't know. I just observed. Children always tell us what they need. We just have to stop trying to guess and start truly listening." Robert felt the weight of those words. How many times had he tried to calm Isabella without really seeing what she was trying to communicate? How many lost nights, because he was so trapped in his own pain that he couldn't see hers. Guilt washed over him. Marina noticed and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't blame yourself. Sometimes we need an outsider to see what's right in front of us. Now you know, and we'll help her together." Isabella woke up at that moment. She opened her eyes slowly and looked at Marina, and for the first time in months she managed something like a smile, small, timid, but real. Robert felt his heart tighten. His daughter was coming back. Slowly. And it was all thanks to this woman who had arrived just a day before. While Marina helped Isabella with her breakfast, Robert went down to his office. He sat in his chair and looked at his phone. Dozens of work messages, meetings, demands. But for the first time in a long time, none of it seemed important. What mattered was upstairs. His daughter, his reason for living, and the real possibility that she could be healed, that they both could be healed, but Robert didn't yet know that the cure would come with pain, that Marina was about to uncover secrets he had buried deep, that the moon that brought peace to Isabella was just the beginning of a journey that would reopen wounds he had desperately tried to close, and that, in the end, he would have to make a choice between continuing to run from the past or facing it once and for all, for his daughter's sake, for his own sake, and perhaps for the sake of the woman who arrived as an employee and was becoming something far more important than he could have imagined. The following days brought a subtle but profound transformation to that beachside house. Marina would wake up early, prepare breakfast, and care for Isabella with a dedication that went beyond professional duty. Robert watched everything from a distance, still in disbelief at the change. The nights, once marked by heart-wrenching screams, now followed a different pattern. Isabella still woke up at 3 in the morning, but she no longer screamed. She would just get out of bed and walk to the window, where she would watch the sky for long minutes. Marina was always there, sitting in silence, respecting that moment. And after a few minutes of contemplating the moon, Isabella would return to bed and sleep peacefully until dawn. Robert still didn't fully understand what was happening, but he didn't dare question it. For the first time in months, he was able to sleep for a few consecutive hours. His face, once marked by exhaustion, began to regain some of its color. At the office, he could finally concentrate in meetings. Michael, his partner, commented that he seemed like a new man, and Robert knew it was true, but along with the relief came a growing unease. What had Marina discovered that he couldn't see? Why did the moon calm Isabella so much? One afternoon, while Isabella was taking a nap, Robert found Marina in the living room, folding clean clothes. He sat on the sofa next to her and remained silent for a moment, as if searching for the right words. Marina continued her work, waiting. "I need to understand," Robert finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "What did you see that I didn't? Why does she react that way to the moon?" Marina stopped folding the clothes and looked at him. Her brown eyes had a depth that Robert hadn't noticed before. "Can I ask you a question first?" Robert nodded. "Isabella's mother. Did she like to watch the sky?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He turned pale, his hands trembling slightly. "Yes," he answered with difficulty. "Helen was passionate about astronomy. She would spend hours looking at the stars. She used to say the universe held the answers to everything." Marina nodded slowly. "And did she do that with Isabella?" Robert closed his eyes, the memory flooding back with force. "Every night. Ever since Isabella was a baby, Helen would take her to the balcony and show her the moon, the stars, tell her stories about constellations. It was their ritual, their special moment that only the two of them shared." His voice broke. "I couldn't bear to see it after Helen was gone. I removed everything. The photos, the objects, the memories. I thought it would be easier for Isabella to forget." "But children don't forget," Marina said gently. "Especially when they lose someone so important. They keep it all inside. And when they can't express it, their bodies speak for them. Isabella wasn't having crises. At night, she was looking for her mother, in the only place where they used to meet, in the sky." Marina's words echoed in Robert's mind like a painful revelation. How had he not realized? How had he been so blind? He covered his face with his hands, trying to hold back the tears. "I just wanted to protect her from the pain. I just didn't want her to suffer like I was suffering." Marina placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know, but sometimes protecting too much also hurts. Isabella needed to remember, she needed to feel, she needed to process the loss in her own way." Robert lifted his face, his eyes red. "And now what do I do?" Marina took a deep breath. "First, we need to let her connect with this memory. The moon is her link to her mother. We can't take that away. Second, she needs more than just looking out the window. She needs to understand that her mother didn't disappear. She just changed form. She's present in a different way." "But how do I do that? How do I explain something I can't even accept myself?" Robert's voice was almost a desperate whisper. Marina was silent for a moment. Then she said something that would change everything. "Mr. Miller, may I explore the house? Look for objects that belonged to Isabella's mother. Maybe we can find something that can help." Robert hesitated. The idea of digging up the past terrified him. But he looked at Marina and saw only sincere intentions. He nodded slowly. "It's all in the basement storage. I put it there. I didn't have the courage to donate it or throw it away." That same afternoon, while Isabella played in her room, Marina went down to the basement. The space was large but dark and dusty. Stacked boxes took up almost the entire area. Marina turned on the light and began to search. She opened the first box and found women's clothes, delicate, still perfumed with a faint scent of lavender. She opened another and found books on astronomy, notebooks with annotations, drawings of constellations. In the third box, she found what she was looking for, photographs, dozens of them. Marina sat on the cold basement floor and began to look at the photos one by one. Helen was beautiful with a wide smile and bright eyes. In every image she radiated life. There were photos of her alone, others with Robert, and many with baby Isabella. But what caught Marina's attention was a detail present in almost every photograph. Helen wore a pendant, a silver crescent moon, delicate and shiny. In several images she was holding Isabella in her arms, pointing to the night sky, mother and daughter looking up, at the stars, at the moon. Marina felt her chest tighten. There was the answer, the ritual, the connection. What Isabella was desperately searching for every night. It wasn't just her mother. It was that moment, that gesture, that shared gaze into the infinite. Marina put one of the photos in her pocket, the one where Helen was holding Isabella and pointing to the crescent moon. She closed the boxes and went up from the basement, her heart racing. She knew what she had to do, but she also knew it would be risky. During dinner, Robert noticed that Marina was different, more thoughtful, more serious. He wanted to ask what she had found in the basement, but he was afraid of the answer. After Isabella went to sleep, Marina came down and found Robert in the living room. He was drinking a glass of whiskey, staring into space. She sat down across from him. "I found the photos." Robert just nodded without looking at her. "And I found something else. The pendant Helen used to wear. Do you still have it?" Robert stiffened. That pendant was kept in the safe in his bedroom. It was the only memory he hadn't been able to store in the basement. It stayed there, locked away, as if locking up the object would prevent the pain from escaping. "Yes, I have it." "Why?" Marina chose her words carefully. "I think Isabella needs to see it, needs to touch it, needs to feel that her mother is still present in some way, and that pendant could be the bridge." Robert stood up abruptly. "No, that's crazy. You'll reopen a wound that's just starting to heal." Marina also stood up, firm. "The wound never healed, Mr. Miller. It was just covered up, and it's getting infected underneath. Isabella isn't truly getting better. She's just finding a way to cope with the absence, but she hasn't understood the loss yet, and until she does, she'll remain trapped." Marina's words sounded harsh but true. Robert knew she was right. But accepting it meant facing his own pain. It meant admitting he was running away, and he didn't know if he had the strength for that. He sat down again, defeated. "You don't understand. I can't look at those things without breaking down. I can't talk about Helen without feeling like I'm going to lose my mind." "I understand more than you think," Marina said in a soft voice. "I lost someone too. Lucas's father. He left when my son was only 2. It wasn't the same as your situation, but the pain of raising a child alone, of seeing them ask about their father, of not having answers. I know that well, and I learned that pretending the absence doesn't exist only makes things worse. Lucas needed to know. He needed to feel. And today he deals with it in a healthy way because I didn't hide the truth from him." Robert looked at Marina with a new respect. She wasn't just a nanny. She was a woman who had fought her own battles, who understood loss, who knew the weight of moving on. He took a deep breath. "What do you suggest I do?" Marina sat down again. "Give me permission to use the pendant, and some photos. I'll introduce these memories to Isabella gradually. I'll help her rebuild her mother's memory in a healthy way, but I need your trust." Robert was silent for long minutes. Finally, he nodded. "Do what you think is best. Just don't hurt her more than she's already been hurt." Marina smiled sadly. "I would never do that. Trust me." That night, Robert went up to his room and opened the safe. There was the silver crescent moon pendant. He held it in his hand, feeling the cold metal against his skin. He closed his eyes, and a torrent of memories flooded his mind. Helen wearing that pendant on their wedding day. Helen wearing it when Isabella was born. Helen wearing it the last time they saw each other, before she left the house and never came back. He pressed the pendant against his chest and let the tears fall. After a few minutes, he went down and handed the object to Marina. She received it with reverence, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The following days were about preparation. Marina didn't introduce the memories abruptly. She started slowly. First, during the nightly ritual at the window, she began to tell stories about the stars. Stories that Helen used to tell, according to what Robert had shared. Isabella listened attentively, her eyes fixed on the sky. Then Marina began to mention her mother in a natural way. "Your mom loved to look at the moon, you know. She thought the moon held beautiful secrets." Isabella reacted with small gestures, a nod of her head, a deeper gaze. Little by little, Marina was weaving Helen's memory back into the girl's life. A week later, during the nightly ritual, Marina took the photo out of her pocket. "Isabella, I found something I think you'll like to see." The girl looked at her, curious. Marina showed her the photograph. "Look who's here. It's you and your mom looking at the moon." Isabella took the photo with trembling little hands. She looked at the image for a long time, her eyes filled with tears. But this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of recognition, of longing, of love. She pointed to Helen in the photo and then to the sky. Marina felt her heart ache. "That's right, my sweet girl. Your mom is in the sky now, but she's still looking at you, still taking care of you. And every time you look at the moon, you'll be able to feel her close." Isabella hugged the photo to her chest and cried. Marina wrapped her in a gentle hug, letting the girl release all her pent-up emotion. It was a long cry, but it was a different kind of cry. It was a cry of liberation. When Isabella finally calmed down, she looked at Marina and did something surprising. She smiled. A small, tear-stained smile, but a genuine one. Marina smiled back, her own eyes moist. From that night on, the ritual changed. Isabella still woke up at 3 in the morning, but now she took the photo with her to the window. She would look at the moon, then at the photo, and whisper words that only she understood. Marina would stand there in silence, just accompanying her. And after a few minutes, Isabella would go back to bed, holding the photo, and fall asleep peacefully. For the first time, she was processing her loss. She was finding a way to keep her mother alive inside her without it destroying her. Robert watched everything from a distance. He saw his daughter's transformation. He saw Marina's careful work, and he felt a mixture of gratitude and guilt. Gratitude because Isabella was getting better. Guilt because he hadn't been able to do it alone. One night, he confessed this to Marina. They were in the kitchen, drinking tea after Isabella had fallen asleep. "I feel like I failed her. I failed as a father. I failed to understand what she needed." Marina looked at him kindly. "You didn't fail. You were dealing with your own pain. It's impossible to take care of someone when we're drowning ourselves, but you're better now, and you can start over. This time, the right way." Robert nodded, but the guilt still weighed on him. "How do I fix this? How do I make up for lost time?" "It's not about making up for time," Marina said. "It's about being present from now on. Isabella doesn't need you to be perfect. She needs you to be real, for you to process your pain too, for you to also learn to remember Helen without destroying yourself." The words touched Robert deeply. He looked at this woman who had come into his life just a few weeks ago and felt something strange, a connection, an admiration, the beginning of something he couldn't name. Marina noticed his gaze and looked away, slightly uncomfortable. She knew she was crossing invisible boundaries. She was no longer just an employee. She was becoming part of this family, and that scared her, because her life was different. Her problems were different. She had Lucas waiting for her every week. She had bills to pay. She had a reality completely different from this luxurious beachside mansion. She couldn't allow herself to feel anything beyond professionalism. She stood up and said goodnight, going up to her room before the conversation went beyond what was safe. Robert was left alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty teacup. For the first time in a long time, he felt something other than pain and exhaustion. He felt hope. He felt life. And he felt something else, which he preferred not to name because it was still too soon, because it was inappropriate, because Marina was an employee. But the heart doesn't understand hierarchies, and his was beginning to awaken from a long winter. Meanwhile, upstairs, Marina lay in bed and picked up her phone. She called the neighbor who was looking after Lucas. The boy was fine, had eaten dinner and done his homework. Marina missed him. She hadn't seen her son in person for 2 weeks. They only talked on the phone every day. Lucas asked when she would be coming home. Marina promised she would spend the next Sunday with him. She hung up the phone with a heavy heart. She was doing this for him, to give him a better life. But the distance hurt. It hurt a lot. She looked out her bedroom window and saw the crescent moon shining in the sky. She thought of Helen. She thought of Isabella. She thought of all the mothers who leave and leave pieces of themselves in the children who remain. She thought of Lucas's own father, who chose to leave in a different way but whose absence was just as profound. And she thought about how strange life is, how she, a simple woman from a humble neighborhood, was here in this mansion, healing the wounds of people who lived in a world completely different from hers. But deep down she realized, pain is universal. Loss does not choose a social class, and love, when it's true, doesn't either. Marina closed her eyes and fell asleep, thinking that maybe she was in the right place, that maybe all of this had a greater purpose, that maybe she wasn't just here to take care of Isabella, but also to heal herself, to learn that it's possible to rebuild after loss, that it's possible to love again, that it's possible to create a new family, even when the previous one has fallen apart, and that sometimes the most unlikely people appear in our lives exactly when we need them most. What Marina didn't know was that the path ahead would be more difficult than she imagined, that Robert still held secrets that would need to be revealed, that his family would have strong opinions about her presence, and that soon she would have to make a choice between maintaining the safe distance of an employee or allowing herself to truly become part of this story, and that either choice would have consequences that would change her life forever. 3 weeks had passed since Marina arrived at the mansion, Isabella's. Transformation was remarkable. The girl now slept through the night, waking only for the brief ritual at the window before returning peacefully to bed. During the day, she was more communicative, played more, and smiled frequently. Robert saw all of this with a mixture of deep relief and growing admiration for Marina. She had done the impossible. She had given him his daughter back, and without realizing it, she was also giving him back the will to live. Work at the construction company began to flow again. Robert could concentrate in meetings, make important decisions, and visit sites. Michael commented that his partner seemed to have been reborn, and it was true. For the first time since Helen's departure, Robert felt there could be a future, that life had not ended on that tragic day, that it was possible to rebuild. But rebuilding meant facing the past, and he wasn't ready for that yet, at least not completely. One Thursday evening, Robert had to travel to Fort Lauderdale, an important meeting with investors that couldn't be postponed. He hesitated to leave the house, but Marina reassured him. "You can go, I'll take care of everything here. Isabella is fine. Everything. We'll be okay." Robert looked at her with gratitude and left, promising to return the next afternoon. Marina took advantage of that night to deepen the ritual with Isabella even further. In addition to the photo, she had kept the pendant Robert had given her. That night, when the clock struck 3 in the morning, Isabella woke up as usual. But this time, Marina had something special prepared. When the girl approached the window with the photo in her hands, Marina knelt beside her. "Isabella, I have something your mother used to wear, something very special that she kept close to her heart." Isabella looked at Marina with curiosity. The caregiver opened her hand and revealed the crescent moon pendant. The girl's eyes widened, immediately recognizing the object. She extended her trembling little hands and touched the pendant with reverence. Her tears began to fall. Marina carefully placed the chain around Isabella's neck. "Now you can carry your mother with you always. Whenever you miss her, just touch this, and she'll be close." Isabella hugged Marina tightly, crying, but it was a cry of gratitude, of healing, of love. The two of them stood there, embraced, looking at the moon through the window. And in that moment, Marina felt she had done the right thing, that all the risk had been worth it, that Isabella was finally finding peace. After a few minutes, the girl returned to bed, still clutching the pendant to her chest, and fell asleep with a smile on her face. Marina went down to the living room, her heart still racing from the emotion of the moment. She sat on the sofa, and took a deep breath. That's when she heard the sound of a car entering the garage, strangely early. She looked at the clock. At 4 in the morning, Robert wasn't supposed to be back so soon. Her heart pounded. Had something happened? Was he okay? The front door opened and Robert walked in, his expression weary. Marina stood up, worried. "Mr. Miller, did something happen? Was the meeting cancelled?" He looked at her with a tiredness that went beyond physical. "I couldn't stay away. I was worried. I decided to come back early. How's Isabella?" "She's sleeping. Everything went well." Robert nodded and went upstairs without another word. Marina remained in the living room, uneasy. There was something different about him, a tension she couldn't identify. She decided to go up too to check if everything was okay. When she reached the second-floor hallway, she saw that the door to Isabella's room was ajar. Robert was inside. Marina approached silently and peeked through the crack. Robert was kneeling beside the bed watching Isabella sleep. The lamplight illuminated the girl's serene face. And then Robert saw it. The pendant. Isabella was sleeping, clutching the silver pendant to her chest. The same pendant he had given Marina to use carefully. The same pendant he hadn't had the courage to look at for months. Something inside him broke. Marina saw him extend a trembling hand and touch the pendant. She saw him squeeze his eyes shut, trying to hold back tears. She saw him stand up abruptly and leave the room, his face transfigured by emotion. He walked past Marina without seeing her and hurried down the stairs. She followed him, concerned. When she reached the living room, she found Robert standing, his hands resting on the sideboard, his breathing heavy. "Mr. Miller," she called softly. He turned to face her, and Marina saw something in his eyes that frightened her. Anger, pain, betrayal. "What did you do?" His voice was low but charged with emotion. "Why did you give her the pendant? I didn't authorize that." Marina felt her heart sink. "I thought it would be good, that it would help her connect even more with her mother's memory." Robert took a step forward, his voice rising. "You had no right to do that without consulting me. You've crossed every line. You are not part of this family. You are just an employee." The words cut Marina like blades. She stepped back, feeling the sting of rejection. But then something inside her reacted, something that had been buried for a long time. The frustration of always being invisible, of always serving without being seen, of always giving without receiving recognition. "I know exactly what my place is, Mr. Miller. I know I'm just the nanny, but I also know that I've done more for your daughter in 3 weeks than you managed to do in months. And do you know why? Because I wasn't afraid to look at her pain. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I faced it." Robert was paralyzed. Marina continued, her voice trembling but firm. "You think you protected Isabella by removing all memories of her mother? You think erasing the past makes the pain disappear? It doesn't, Mr. Miller. It just buries it deeper. Isabella was screaming every night because no one would let her remember, because no one validated the longing she felt, because you, with all your money and power, preferred to pretend that Helen never existed." The words came out like an avalanche. Robert tried to argue back. "You have no right to judge me. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what it's like to wake up every day and remember that the person you loved is no longer here, that your plans are gone, that your family is broken. You know nothing about me." "I know more than you think," Marina replied, her own tears starting to fall. "I lost someone too. I also had to raise a child alone, explaining an absence that hurts every single day. But you know what the difference is? I didn't lie to my son. I didn't pretend his father never existed. I gave him the tools to deal with the loss. And today, Lucas is a happy child, even while carrying that absence." Robert felt the words hit home. He wanted to scream, to throw Marina out, to make her stop speaking truths that hurt too much. But he couldn't, because deep down, he knew she was right. He knew he had failed. He knew his way of dealing with the loss had harmed Isabella, and accepting that was devastating. "You need to leave," he finally said, his voice broken. I can't have someone here who disrespects me like this. Marina felt the floor disappear from under her feet. Being fired meant going back to 3 jobs. It meant instability. It meant disappointing Lucas, but it also meant keeping her dignity. She nodded. I'll pack my things and leave at dawn, but before I go, I'm going to make something very clear. Everything I did for Isabella, because I saw a suffering child that no one was able to help, and I succeeded. She's sleeping peacefully, she's happy, she's processing her loss in a healthy way, and if you take that away from her now, if you go back to hiding the memories, you will destroy all the progress. You will throw your daughter back into that pit of despair. And then, Mr. Miller, you will have to live with that. Marina went upstairs, her legs trembling. She entered the room she occupied and began to pack her few clothes into her suitcase. The tears fell freely now. She had gotten attached. She had gotten too involved. She had broken the golden rule of every domestic worker. Never get attached. Never think you're part of it. Because in the end, they always remind you of your place. And it hurts. It hurts a lot. Meanwhile, Robert slowly climbed the stairs. He entered Isabella's room and stood there, watching his daughter sleep, clutching the pendant. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly look at the scene. Isabella was at peace. Her face showed no signs of anguish. There was no tension. There was only serenity. That pendant, the object he had avoided for so long, was bringing her comfort. Not pain, comfort. Robert knelt beside the bed and finally let the floodgates open. He cried. He cried like he hadn't cried since Helen's funeral. He cried for the wife he had lost, for the family that had fallen apart, for the months of suffering he had inflicted on his daughter without realizing it. He cried for his own inability to deal with the loss, and he cried because Marina, the woman he had just fired, was right. About everything. After long minutes, he stood up and left the room. He went downstairs to his office. He opened the safe where he kept important documents, and deep inside, he found what he was looking for, Helen's death certificate. He had never been able to read that paper completely. He always averted his eyes from the final words. But now, he forced himself to read it. Every word, every detail, the cause, the time, the place. Everything he had tried to erase from his memory. Helen had left that morning to pick Isabella up from school. It was an ordinary morning. She was happy. They had talked about plans for the weekend. Robert was at his office when he got the call. Accident, hospital, serious. He dropped everything and ran. But when he arrived, it was too late. Helen was gone. Quickly. No chance for goodbyes. No chance for last words. Just the sudden, absolute emptiness. Robert never allowed Isabella to go to the funeral. He thought it would be too traumatic for a 5-year-old. He sent the girl to stay with her grandmother while he took care of everything. And then, when he returned home, he removed all the memories. He thought Isabella would forget that way, that it would be easier. But he was wrong. So wrong. He put the paper back and went up to his own room. He sat on the bed and looked out the window. The moon was still shining in the sky. Helen loved that moon. She used to say it was constant, that no matter where they were, looking at the moon would connect them. And now, Isabella was using that same moon to connect with her mother, to keep her memory alive, to process the loss, exactly as Marina had said. Robert got up and went to Marina's room. The door was ajar. He knocked lightly. Marina appeared, her eyes red, her suitcase almost packed. They looked at each other in silence for a long moment. Then Robert said in a choked voice, "I'm sorry. You were right. About everything. I failed Isabella. I tried to protect her from the pain by hiding her mother's memory. But I only caused more suffering. And you, in just a few weeks, did what I couldn't do in months. You gave me my daughter back." Marina felt the tears return. "You didn't have to fire me. I understand your pain. I understand your fear." Robert shook his head. "I don't want you to go. Please, stay. Not just for Isabella, but because I need help too. I need to learn how to deal with this loss. I need to learn to remember Helen without destroying myself, and I think you can teach me that." Marina looked at this powerful man and saw only someone broken trying to rebuild. Someone who had finally admitted his vulnerability. Someone who was asking for help. She nodded slowly. "I'll stay, but on one condition. You have to commit to facing this pain, to participating in Isabella's healing process, to being truly present." Robert agreed. "I promise." That early morning they sat in the living room and talked like they had never talked before. Robert told her about Helen, about how they met, about their wedding, about the joy when Isabella was born, about the challenges of raising a special needs child, about the love that grew every day, and about the unbearable emptiness that the loss brought. Marina listened to it all, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just holding his hand when the words failed. And then she opened up too. She told him about her own story, about how she met Lucas's father, about the unexpected pregnancy, about his choice to leave, about the daily struggle to raise her son alone, about the exhausting jobs, about the exhaustion, but also about the joy of watching Lucas grow, about the strength she discovered she had, about the certainty that despite everything, she was doing the best she could. When the sun began to rise, they were still there talking, and something had changed between them. They were no longer boss and employee. They were two people who had shared their deepest pains, who had allowed themselves to be vulnerable, who had found in each other a rare kind of understanding, and who, without realizing it, were planting the seeds of something much greater. In the following days, Robert began to actively participate in the nightly ritual. When Isabella woke up at 3 in the morning, he would go up with Marina. The three of them would stand at the window looking at the moon. Robert began to tell Isabella stories about Helen, about how her mother loved the stars, about the walks they used to take, about the love she had for her daughter. Isabella listened to everything, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling, and little by little, she was rebuilding her mother's image in a healthy way. Robert also began to put the photos back up around the house. First one, then another, until all the walls once again held pictures of Helen. And instead of pain, it brought comfort. The house came back to life. It had a history. It had memory. Marina watched everything with satisfaction. She was watching a family rebuild itself, and somehow she was rebuilding herself too. One Saturday, Robert suggested that Marina bring Lucas to spend the day at the house. She hesitated, but accepted. When Lucas arrived, shy and curious, Isabella welcomed him with enthusiasm. The two children connected immediately. They spent the afternoon playing on the beach, building sandcastles, laughing. Robert watched from a distance, next to Marina. And for the first time in a long time he could imagine a future different from what he had planned, but a possible future, and maybe even a happy one. The months that followed brought profound changes for everyone. The beachside mansion, once silent and somber, was filled with life again. Isabella blossomed with each passing day. Not only did she sleep peacefully every night, but she also began to develop in ways that surprised even her doctors. She started talking more, interacting, showing affection. The nightly ritual continued, but now it was a moment of connection, not desperation. Every night, Robert, Marina, and Isabella would gather at the window to watch the moon and give thanks for Helen. And each night, Isabella would hold her pendant and smile. Lucas became a constant presence in the house. Every weekend, Marina would bring him to play with Isabella. The two developed a special bond. Lucas, with his contagious energy, made Isabella laugh out loud. Isabella, with her sweetness, taught Lucas about patience and kindness. Robert watched the two children playing and felt his heart warm. This was family, different from the one he had planned, but family all the same. Between Robert and Marina, something was growing silently. It started with longer gazes, conversations that stretched late into the night, small gestures of mutual care. Robert began to realize he eagerly awaited the moments they were alone to talk. Marina began to feel her heart race when he entered the room, but both hesitated to name what they were feeling. The barriers still existed. He was the boss. She was the employee. He lived in a mansion. She came from a modest neighborhood, different worlds. But the heart doesn't understand social classes. It was Mrs. Eleanor, Robert's mother, who finally brought the issue to light. She came from Fort Lauderdale to spend a week at the house. Robert was apprehensive. His mother had been against the idea of hiring an inexperienced nanny from the beginning. She said he needed qualified professionals, not someone who would learn on the job. But when she arrived and saw Isabella, Mrs. Eleanor was speechless. Her granddaughter was unrecognizable, happy, healthy, communicative. During dinner on the first day, Mrs. Eleanor carefully observed the dynamics of the house. She saw how Marina cared for Isabella with genuine affection. She saw how Robert looked at Marina with a tenderness she hadn't seen in her son for years. She saw how the children played together like siblings, and she saw something more. She saw love, blooming, and that worried her. The next morning, when Marina was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, Mrs. Eleanor came in and closed the door. The two were alone. The older woman, elegant and direct, got straight to the point. "Marina, I need to talk to you about my son." Marina felt her stomach clench. She knew what was coming. "Yes, Ma'am," Mrs. Eleanor sighed. "Robert is a good man, but he is also a vulnerable man. He lost his wife tragically. He is seeking comfort, and I fear he is confusing gratitude with other feelings." Marina felt her face flush. "I understand your concern, ma'am, but I can assure you that I keep my relationship with Mr. Miller strictly professional." Mrs. Eleanor looked her in the eye. "Is that so? Because I saw how he looks at you, and I saw how you look at him, and as a mother, I need to protect my son from more suffering. You come from very different worlds, and that, my dear, can cause problems." The words hurt, but Marina maintained her composure. "I respect your opinion, and I can assure you I have no intention of taking advantage of the situation. I am here to take care of Isabella, nothing more." Mrs. Eleanor nodded, but she didn't seem convinced. "I hope that's true, because if you hurt my son or my granddaughter, you will have to deal with me." Marina just agreed in silence, her heart heavy. That conversation deeply affected Marina. She spent the rest of the day avoiding Robert, keeping her distance. He noticed the change and was confused. That night, after Isabella was asleep, he found her in the kitchen washing dishes. "Did something happen? You seem different." Marina continued washing without looking at him. "Everything's fine, just tired." Robert didn't believe her. He knew there was something more, but he didn't press. In the following days, the tension grew. Mrs. Eleanor continued to watch everything with a critical eye. Marina distanced herself more and more. Robert grew increasingly frustrated, until, on the eve of Mrs. Eleanor's departure, everything came to a head. It was night, and Robert was in his office reviewing contracts when his mother came in. They needed to talk. Mrs. Eleanor closed the door and sat down across from her son. "Robert, you're falling in love with the nanny." He froze. He tried to deny it, but the words wouldn't come out. His mother continued, "And she's falling for you too, but son, this is madness. You barely know this woman. She comes from another world. You have nothing in common besides Isabella." Robert finally found his voice. "Mum, with all due respect, you don't know what you're talking about. Marina isn't just the nanny. She saved Isabella. She saved me. She helped me face the loss of Helen in a way no one else could. She taught me how to be a father again. And yes, I am falling in love with her, and I don't see a problem with that." Mrs. Eleanor stood up, agitated. "The problem is that you're confusing gratitude with love. The problem is that Helen died less than a year ago, and you're already replacing her. The problem is that this woman might be taking advantage of your vulnerability." Robert also stood up, his voice firm. "Marina is none of those things, and Helen is not being replaced. No one will ever replace Helen, but that doesn't mean I can't move on, that I can't love again. And Marina is not taking advantage of anything. She is genuine. She is dedicated. She has integrity." Mother and son stared at each other in silence. Finally, Mrs. Eleanor sighed, her voice softer. "Son, I just want you to be happy, but I also want you to be careful, to be sure of your feelings, not to make rash decisions you might regret." Robert nodded. "I understand, and I promise to be careful, but I also ask you to trust my judgment. I know what I'm feeling, and I know that Marina is special." Mrs. Eleanor hugged her son. "All right, I'll trust you, but please go slow. Let things happen naturally." Robert promised he would. After his mother left, he was alone in the office thinking, was he confusing gratitude with love? Was he being rash? He closed his eyes and thought of Marina, her smile, her soft voice, the way she cared for Isabella, the way she made him feel alive again, and he knew the answer. It wasn't confusion, it wasn't gratitude, it was love, real and deep. The next morning, Mrs. Eleanor left for Fort Lauderdale. Before she went, she called Marina for a private conversation. "I spoke with my son, and I understand that perhaps I judged you too quickly. If Robert trusts you, I should trust you too, but still I ask you to take care of him, to be honest about your feelings, and not to be afraid to be happy." The words surprised Marina. She nodded, emotional. "I promise." With Mrs. Eleanor's departure, the tension in the house eased, but Marina still kept a certain distance from Robert. She was afraid of giving in to something that might not work out, afraid of losing her job if things went wrong, afraid of hurting Lucas, afraid of not being enough for someone like Robert, but mostly afraid of truly falling in love and then getting hurt. It was Isabella who ended up forcing the situation. One night, during the moon ritual, the girl looked at Robert and then at Marina. She took both their hands and joined them. She made a heart shape with her own hands and pointed at them. Robert and Marina looked at each other, surprised. Isabella repeated the gesture, insistent. Robert smiled. "I think she's saying she likes us together." Marina felt her eyes fill with tears. After Isabella fell asleep, Robert asked Marina to stay in the living room. They needed to talk. They sat on the sofa side by side. Robert took her hand. "Marina, I know this might seem strange. I know I'm your employer. I know we have very different lives. But I can't pretend I don't feel anything anymore. I'm falling in love with you. And I think you feel something for me too." Marina felt the tears stream down her face. "I do. I feel so much. But I'm scared, Robert. Scared that this is just a moment. Scared that when the dust settles, you'll realize it was just gratitude. Scared of losing everything I've built here." Robert squeezed her hand. "It's not gratitude, it's love. And I don't want you to be just the nanny. I want you to be part of the family. I want to build something real with you. You, Lucas, Isabella, and me. A real family." Marina looked into his eyes and saw sincerity. She saw love. She saw a future. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that this could work. They kissed there, in that living room illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the window. It was a soft kiss filled with promises, and when they separated, they both knew there was no going back. They were together, and they would face whatever came together. The following months were about building. Robert formally introduced Marina to friends and family. There were judgmental looks, malicious comments, people questioning the speed of the relationship, but Robert didn't care. Marina was his choice, and he always defended her. Little by little, people came to accept it. And many, upon meeting Marina, understood why Robert loved her. She was genuine, strong, loving. Lucas came to live with them. He had his own room, decorated with everything he dreamed of. He attended a good school. He made friends. But most importantly, he had a complete family. Robert treated the boy like a son, and Lucas began to call him Dad. The first time it happened, Robert cried. He never imagined he would have 2 children. But now he did, and he loved them both equally. A year after Marina's arrival, Robert asked her to marry him. It was simple, but emotional. During the nightly ritual with Isabella by their side, he knelt and offered her a ring. It wasn't the biggest diamond, it wasn't the most elaborate proposal, but it was sincere. "Marina, you gave me my life back. You taught me how to love again. You gave me a family again. Will you marry me?" Marina could barely answer through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 3 months later in a simple ceremony in the mansion's garden. Only close family and intimate friends. Mrs. Eleanor cried throughout the ceremony, but they were tears of joy. Isabella carried the rings, proud. Lucas walked beside her, protectively. And when the officiant declared Robert and Marina husband and wife, everyone applauded. The moon shone in the sky as if Helen were there blessing their union. Life followed its natural course. Robert balanced work and family better. Marina went back to school, getting a degree in education. Isabella continued to progress, attending a special school and making friends. Lucas grew up strong and healthy. The house was always full of laughter, games, and love. Mrs. Eleanor visited frequently and had formed a special bond with Lucas, who called her Grandma. 5 years had passed since that first night Marina arrived. Now she was pregnant again, a girl. Robert was radiant. Isabella was excited to be a big sister. Lucas couldn't wait to have a little sister. And Marina, feeling life grow inside her, knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. They decided to name the baby Luna, in honor of the moon that had healed them all, the moon that connected past and present, the moon that brought Marina to them, the moon that represented Helen watching over them all from the sky. When Luna was born, she was welcomed with so much love, it seemed impossible to fit inside one house. The nightly ritual continued. Now there were 5 of them: Robert, Marina, Isabella, Lucas, and little Luna, all gathered at the window looking at the moon, giving thanks. Thanking Helen, who had loved so much, thanking Marina, who had arrived when they needed her most, thanking the family that was reborn from the ashes of loss, thanking life, with all its pains and joys. Robert looked at the scene and could hardly believe it. Years ago he was drowning in despair. He had lost everything. But life gave him a second chance, not the same as the first, different, but no less precious. Helen would always have a place in his heart. She would always be remembered, always loved. But now there was room for more love, for Marina, for Lucas, for Luna, for the family they built together. Marina held Luna in her arms and looked at the man she had learned to love. She remembered the day she arrived at that house, scared, desperate for stability. She never imagined she would find not just a job, but a home, a family, a love. Life had been hard on her, but it had also been generous. It had given her Lucas. It had given her strength. And now it had given her Robert, given her Isabella, Luna, and Mrs. Eleanor, a complete family. Isabella, now 12, still wore her mother's pendant every day. She no longer needed to wake up at 3 in the morning to look at the moon. But she liked the family ritual. She liked remembering her birth mother while hugging her heart mother, because both were important, both loved her, and she was lucky enough to carry the love of both. Lucas, at 11, was a happy and confident boy. He had a present father, sisters he loved, a grandmother who spoiled him, and the certainty that even though his biological father had left, he had a family that would never abandon him. Marina looked at him and felt proud. She had raised a good boy, and now, with Robert by her side, she could give him everything she had always dreamed of. Luna grew up surrounded by love. She would not know the pain of loss that marked her siblings, but she would learn about resilience, about rebuilding, about how it's possible to be reborn even after the worst storms, and she would learn about Helen, the woman she never met but who in a way had made all of this, had made all possible, because it was her loss that brought Marina, and it was Marina who brought back life. The nights of screams were long gone. Now, that beachside house was filled with laughter, with stories, with plans, with a future. The moon continued to shine in the sky, constant, faithful, a reminder that, even in the deepest darkness, there is always light. There is always hope. There is always the possibility of starting over. Robert hugged Marina from behind, both of them watching the children through the window. She rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you think Helen would be happy?" Marina asked softly. Robert smiled. "I'm sure of it. Helen always wanted me to be happy, for Isabella to be happy, and we are. More than I ever thought possible." Marina turned and kissed him. "I love you." He responded with the same intensity. "I love you too." Mrs. Eleanor, sitting in the living room armchair, watched the scene and smiled. She had doubted, she had questioned, but she had been wrong. Marina was the best thing that could have happened to her son and granddaughter, and now seeing that family gathered full of love and hope, she knew she was witnessing a miracle. The miracle of a family reborn, of hearts that had healed, of a love that blossomed where once there was only pain. The moon would continue to shine every night, and every night that family would continue to gather to look at it, to remember, to give thanks, to connect. Because the moon was not just a celestial body, it was a symbol of eternal love, of precious memories, of second chances, of family, of life, and above all, of hope. The hope that, no matter how dark the night, there will always be a light in the sky to guide the way back home. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Marina, and Isabella has touched your hearts deeply. If you were moved by this journey of loss, rebuilding, and love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment stood out to you the most. Was it the first moon ritual, the confrontation between Robert and Marina, or perhaps the happy ending of this family that rose from the ashes? Every day we bring intense and true stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, showing that it's possible to start over, to love again, and to find light even in the darkest moments. Your presence here is very important to us. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that there is always hope. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions. Until then, and may the moon always light your way.